Thank you for taking the time to be with us here today. My name is Haley McLaughlin. I am a consultant here at Multnomah Group, and today we are going to talk about the very important topic of employee engagement and required disclosures. A few housekeeping items to get us started. First, you should be able to see my screen, the cover of our Fiduciary Training Program. This webinar is being recorded. We will send out links in a few business days after this recording, so you have it. If you need to duck out early, you should be able to log back in and finish it out. Second, you are all on mute. If you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A function that should be either at the bottom or top of your screen, and I'll try to get to your questions as they come up or at the end. If you think of something after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is on our website. Okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and dig right in. For those of you who are current Multnomah Group clients, the look and feel of this presentation should be familiar. It's part of our fiduciary training curriculum. As it says here, the Department of Labor requires employers to educate their committee members on their roles and responsibilities. And to aid in that effort, we have created a 3-tiered fiduciary training program designed to meet committees where they are. This piece is a level 2. Our level 1 is general fiduciary nuts and bolts. Level 2 digs into some specific topics, including investments, this piece on employee engagement. Level 3 gets even further in the weeds, if you will, really giving you practical advice on specifics of running a retirement plan, including meeting minutes, investment policy statements, all sorts of good stuff. So if you're a current Multnomah Group client, this may look a little bit familiar to you. So this topic, employee engagement, is near and dear to my heart, and I think a lot of plan sponsors' hearts, because at the end of the day, we all want participants to be able to retire with dignity, because we're human, we care about the people we work with, and it's generally a social good. This is also a topic at Multnomah Group we talk about a lot, because there tends to be a fair amount of confusion around the subject. And we see fiduciaries, committee members, anyone related to the plan starting to muddle what's required of them versus what they think they should be doing, and what is and isn't required, and who they need to be talking to. So today we will talk about what is required by the Department of Labor for you to engage with employees and participants, other optional ways that plan sponsors, committees, fiduciaries may opt to engage with participants, and then what duties we have to monitor those service providers who are doing some of this work. Okay, now, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, ERISA, requires fiduciaries to inform participants and beneficiaries about the plan through a collection of required disclosures. There's a laundry list of these required disclosures, and they depend on your plan type, plan provisions, occasionally actions that are made by the plan, changes to the plan. We will review a few of the common ones today. We at Multnomah Group also have a great FAQ that covers some of the common ones. Your record keeper or TPA may have a checklist, and the DOL and the IRS both maintain fairly good guides on their websites. I'll point you to the Department of Labor one a little bit later, but it's a good resource and written in a way that's fairly understandable, which is great. So these disclosures can be split into 3 varieties. The first are notices that are required to be sent out automatically, either on a specific time frame or due to some event or milestone. Common ones in this category are the summary plan description, fee notices, blackout notices, things like that. The second kind must be furnished upon request. The best example of this is the plan document. You don't have to send out the plan document annually or provide it to new hires or anything like that, but you do have to provide it to a participant or beneficiary upon request. We recommend if you receive a request that you furnish it as soon as administratively feasible. That's definitely within at least 30 days. And then you also note in your fiduciary file that the request was made and how you responded and resolved that request. The third thing that committees often think about providing to participants and beneficiaries, but is not required, are these other sort of esoteric committee materials, right? Meeting minutes, occasionally investment reports are the things that we at Multnomah Group see most often. Generally, we don't recommend making these pieces public. If you're just distributing the materials without the training that the committee members go through or the discussion surrounding the pieces, it can cause confusion. You'll note that our investment reports, for example, usually say that they are not for participant use for that reason. It is important to note if you are running a governmental plan, it may be required to furnish additional materials, including meeting minutes. So if you're running one of these governmental plans, it's best to dig into those laws more closely. So when you're thinking about these disclosures, it's common to feel a little daunted by the sheer volume of the requirements. However, the Department of Labor allows fiduciaries to delegate some of these functions to a service provider if they lack the expertise or the resources to complete them. So often these notices are the drafting of these notices is delegated to either a third-party administrator or a record keeper. They can also often assist with the distribution of these notices. And then once we get into some of the optional ways to engage with participants, TPAs, record keepers, occasionally education specialists are also being delegated some of these other options, group meetings, one-on-ones, managed accounts, that kind of thing. Okay, a few things to keep in mind when you're thinking about required participant notices. First, all participants must be kept informed, including those terminated participants who have retired or left the organization. We continue to see a focus on these lost participants, so it's vital to keep track of return mailings and work with whatever service provider is assisting with this, TPA or record keeper, to go through the process to find any lost participants. Often it's fairly easy to track down those people that are still working with you, but those that have left the organization or retired need to receive the notices as well. And so this process of locating them as they move around is a really important part of this fiduciary duty. Second, as always, delegation does not absolve the fiduciary of liability. So it's really vital to monitor the providers that are assisting with any kind of employee engagement. We'll get into how exactly to do this in a little bit, but it's really important to keep at the front of your mind that if you have delegated to a service provider to interact with your participants, you really need to continually monitor how they're doing that, what they're doing, and make sure that it is accurate and in the best interest of your participants. Finally, notices should be, to the extent possible, easy to understand and consistent. I think we've probably all looked at these notices. Easy to understand is maybe up in the air a little bit because they're fairly technical by nature. But it's important to make that effort, and when you're reviewing these, to make sure that they are understandable and easy to follow. I think there's been improvement in this with sort of graphics and charts in a lot of ways to make these more digestible. But the consistency is also important, and that's why it often makes sense to only have one provider drafting these, right? So if the fee notice uses specific language, then the blackout notice that goes with that fee notice is using the same kind of language. So we're consistent throughout the notices, maybe the websites, other kinds of announcements. Okay, let's get into some specifics of the notices themselves. Here are a few of the required notices or documents that basically all qualified plans need to have. For extra information, I'll point out that the Department of Labor's reporting and disclosure guide for employee benefit plans is pretty great, as I mentioned. If you just stick that whole phrase into your favorite search engine, it should pop right up. I reference it fairly often. I think it's a really good resource. Okay, so as I'm sure you know, ERISA requires all plans to have a plan document that serves as the basis for running the plan. And as I mentioned, you have to provide a copy of that plan document upon request. The summary plan description is a plain English version of that plan document that does the high-level summary of what the plan document says. Again, plain English is maybe aspirational, but it should be at least easier to understand than the plan document itself. That summary plan description must be given to participants within 90 days of being covered by the plan, and then delivered either every 5 years if the plan is amended or every 10 years if the plan is not amended. So we're looking at really long time frames on that summary plan description. The summary of material modifications is basically an amendment to the summary plan description. It identifies any material changes to the plan since that summary plan description was made. So if you make a change to the provisions of the plan, you can either create a summary of material modifications and you'll deliver that with the SPD as required, or you can amend the summary plan description in totality. And so you have a whole new summary plan description. The next piece is the summary annual report. This is a summary of that Form 5500 that we all love filling out. And it is provided to participants after filing the Form 5500 each year. It must be delivered within 9 months after the plan year end or 2 months after the due date for filing the Form 5500. Participant level fee disclosures and quarterly statements are given to participants, but this can also include the 404A5 notices that identify all fees paid by participants, and that includes investment, administrative, and operational expenses so far as they are known. As with all of these notices, if a service provider is drafting this document, you should really make a point of reviewing it for completeness and accuracy. So again, if you're a Multnomah Group client, you may have a representative from your record keeper coming to this upcoming Q3 meeting, and that meeting is a really great time to check in with them to see if how they are fulfilling these requirements, if they're the ones distributing notices, and what they can do to help you fulfill this obligation. This slide is participant notices that are required based on specific provisions in your plan. So these are not required for every single plan, but if you have these pieces, then you'll need to do them. So automatic enrollment is the first one. You have to provide a notice to participants both initially and then annually as it remains applicable if they are enrolled automatically. And that includes all the different kinds of automatic enrollment. So any time that that's used, an automatic enrollment notice is required. That's also usually paired with the qualified default investment alternative notice. So that's the investment that the fiduciary has chosen to default participants in. Most commonly, we see that to be target dates this day and age, but it can be a multitude of things. These notices are often paired, but they tend to go together. Blackout period notices must be furnished if there's a period of more than 3 days in which a temporary suspension or restriction on participants' accounts. We see this most often when there is a change in record keepers or perhaps a plan merger or some other kind of large record keeping event. When those happen, participants are often barred from making investment elections deferrals or withdrawal changes during these events. So anytime that is happening, and they'll be restricted for 3 days or more, the blackout period notice must go out. For 403B plans, the universal availability notice is required, and you must send that to all participants, everyone that it would be eligible for the plan as soon as they become eligible, right? So that includes people that have not enrolled in the plan. So a lot of these go to a variety of different people. Occasionally it's all eligible employees, occasionally it's all participants and beneficiaries. So it's really important to dig through the specifics of our checklist, your record keeper's checklist, to make sure we are getting these notices to the right people. So now that we've talked about some of the more common notices, the question always becomes, how do I get these to participants, right? The default is mailing the notices, first class mail. That's generally, if you're going to do one thing, mailing is your first and last stop. We have introduced electronic delivery for notices, and it can be permitted, but there are certain requirements that must be met in order to do electronic delivery. Participants must consent to having those notices sent electronically. They also have to be able to opt out of the electronic notices at any time with no charge. And they must also have access to email as part of their daily job. So if you have a varied workforce that is maybe not in front of a computer all day, they may not be eligible for electronic delivery. So mailing is back to your first and best bet. It is never permissible to just post these notices or any letters just to the intranet site or to a bulletin board. That does not get you out of the requirement of mailing or sending electronically. You can absolutely do that in addition to the mailing. So if you want to mail them out and then also put it on the bulletin board in the break room, that's fine, but it doesn't get you around the mailing piece. Okay, so now we've really gone over what is required of you as far as employee engagement goes. And this is the piece that I think trips a lot of people up. You are only required to do these notices. You are not required to educate your participants, which I think sort of flies in the face of what a lot of fiduciaries think. They think they need to make sure that their participants are well educated and understand investments and how the retirement plan works. And at the end of the day, all you're really required to do is send these required notices. Much in the same way that you are required to provide your employees with a safe work environment, but you're not required to give them coffee, this is the same way. You're required to do the notices, but as a part of the benefits program for your organization, you may want to do some additional things, whether that's education through group meetings or one-on-one, whether that's advice, maybe managed accounts, maybe targeted mailings to make sure that those people that are under contributing bump up their deferrals. There's lots of different ways that we can engage with participants that are not required but may make sense for your employee population and as part of your benefit structure. But again, all of this at the end of the day costs money, and you really have to decide where you want your benefit dollars to go. So reasons organizations may want to use service providers to do this employee education, employee engagement. First, it creates a financially literate workforce. I think we can generally all agree that everyone could use some financial literacy. It can reduce the financial stress of workers and create a more productive workforce. Obviously, we want our employees to be not stressed about making their next bills or not stressed about having enough to retire. And if they feel more confident, that may reduce that stress. We can also potentially help employees retire on time. That's good for them and good for the plan sponsor. It can reduce costs associated with workers retiring late. That includes increased compensation if they've been there a long time, getting those merit and cost of living increases, increased healthcare costs. At the end of the day, older employees tend to have higher healthcare costs. So a lot of reasons beyond just the good feeling in your heart for getting people retired on time and with enough money. So when you select a service provider, you need to go through a prudent process. This is especially important if plan money is being used to pay for these service providers. And often if it's record keeping or your TPA, that's often the case. So very first, you want to review your participants' needs to determine the level of engagement and services needed. If you are having 30 days of education on site every year and only 3 people are showing up for the free donuts, you might want to take a look at how much that's costing and whether or not your participants really value this, and change perhaps the level or services you're providing. So that's gather that relevant information. The next, you want to analyze it, right? Analyze the service providers and their available offerings. If you've been doing the same thing for 10 years, it might be time to check in with your record keeper or whoever is providing your education to see if they have come up with new programs or new ways to engage with participants. In this digital age, we see more and more really great work being done online, whether it's retirement calculators or all sorts of little games to get people to engage with the plan and engage with the benefits. So analyze what those service providers have available and what may make sense for your participant needs. The third piece, as always, is to meet and make a decision. Meet perhaps as a committee and go through the analysis you've just done, discuss it, debate it, and make a decision on what kind of employee engagement you want to do. It's important to note that some of this may be settler decisions, so some of this may need to happen outside of the committee, especially if the organization is the one paying for this. That ends up being a settler decision. But committees can certainly make recommendations to the settler. You can get through the back and forth there. So gather your information, analyze it, meet, make a decision, and finally document your process. Put it in the meeting minutes, put it in your fiduciary file, any materials that have been reviewed. You really need to make sure that you can show that you've done a prudent process to get through this. All right, monitoring and evaluating service providers. This is really, really key because these service providers are interacting with your participants, often being paid out of plan assets. So you have a requirement to make sure that they are doing the job that you expect them to do, and they have participants' best interests in mind, and that the information they are providing is clear and accurate and meets all of the requirements as set out by the Department of Labor and the IRS. So after you've decided to hire a service provider, that's not the end of the road. You have to continually monitor and evaluate these people. Our Q3 meetings for Multnomah Group clients are all around monitoring these service providers and making sure the engagement with employees is working. So a few good ways to continue to monitor this service. First of all, you should be obviously reviewing for completeness and accuracy all of the notices they send. Additionally, for these extra services, you want to review reports to identify what mailings have gone, how they went, whether we're doing electronic or snail mail, and identify and making sure that participants are getting those mailings. So again, those lost participants are really important to keep an eye on and making sure that all of those requirements are being met. You should also review reports from service providers to look at participant utilization. If you've come up with an education program where you're really trying to increase the saving rates of your employees, It would be really great to review a report to see if before and after made any difference, right? The only way to make sure that these service providers are adding value is to monitor the change in participants. Another good way, if you're providing one-on-one sessions, either just education or advice, you can set up a mock one-on-one with the committees to make sure that they fully understand what is happening in these meetings. It sounds great to have all of your employees meet with someone who can talk them through the retirement plan, but if these sessions are focused on the wrong things or focused on cross-selling other products, the committee needs to know that and needs to know what is being sold to their participants potentially, but also just what is being told to them, making sure that's accurate and in their best interest. So mock one-on-ones are a really great way to do that. You can also ask to review call center scripts. Increasingly, employees are calling into those call centers. We want to make sure we know what is being said there, that they have all of the correct information, much in the same way as we want to make sure the one-on-one sessions are accurate and helpful. If you've checked our blog recently, you know that we have been talking about digital fiduciary responsibility. So it's really important if you have a benefit website being maintained by a service provider, that you are monitoring what that website looks like, what it says, and what it does. So you want to make sure that you're reviewing computer-generated output. And so all of those pages, whether it's how they select investments, whether they're offering managed accounts, whether it's just education or white papers, it's important to take a look at that and make sure that it is as you expect. Finally, of course, you need to benchmark fees for these services. Department of Labor requires that you pay reasonable fees in light of services provided. So it is wonderful if you are getting a bunch of education and a bunch of employee engagement, but you want to make sure that the plan is only paying for service fees that are reasonable for those services, right? Especially if you have sort of lopsided participation in this. If only 10 employees are ever going to these education sessions, we really want to look and analyze if that's valuable for all of participants to be paying for that. Finally, another reminder, and we will say it, I think, probably every webinar, but you really need to make sure that you are documenting all of the reviews, keeping copies of these documents in your fiduciary file. You can't show that you have a prudent process if you're failing to document those discussions and decisions. So when in doubt, document, document, document. So to wrap up, now you know you're required to inform participants and beneficiaries about the plan through required disclosures. There are lots of them, but there are also lots of resources to make sure that you are fulfilling that duty. You can hire a service provider to help with different areas where participants may need assistance, especially if you don't have the resources or the capability to do so yourself. Your TPA, your record keeper are great partners in this process. And finally, while you are not required to hire service providers to engage with participants, once you do, you must continue to monitor them on an ongoing basis in the same way that you monitor them for the administration of the plan or any other services they are providing you. All right, that is all we have for today. We have finished a little bit early, which is fine. You can get back to your day. I'm sure everyone is busy this beautiful sunny summer day. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to respond to anything. If you haven't been to our website, there's a lot of really great information there. Keep an eye on our blog where we continue to talk about monitoring service providers and other duties related to being a fiduciary. All right, it looks like we don't have any questions. So with that, I will say goodbye. Thanks, everyone.